So my name is Annie Gibson. I'm the director of the Office of Study Abroad at Tulane, and we each semester put on events that try to help us put some really important topics of our time together in a global perspective. And when Kendall and I began talking about some of her research, we were very excited to start thinking about these intersections of cross-cultural communication, race in a global context, and how we sort of navigate issues of immigration, identity, and belonging. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Kendall. Kendall Medford is a PhD student in linguistics at Tulane. She holds a BA in Hispanic linguistics from UNC Chapel Hill. And before coming to Tulane, she served as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic on the Dominican and Haitian border and received a Fulbright grant for teaching English in Brazil. So her research really explores the sociolinguistic variations between the Caribbean Spanish dialects, as well as the usage of Haitian Creole within the Dominican Republic. So I'm really fascinated by her research and interested in hearing this presentation. We also have on the line many students who will be joining a Tulane Study Abroad program in the Dominican Republic on the Haitian border for the semester. So I'm sure these platforms are always very open. Feel free to ask questions via the chat or to ask questions by unmuting yourself. So with that, Kendall, I'll pass it over to you. And also, you should have the ability to share your screen if you need to share any slides.
Just got it. Okay. Let me. And before I get started, if everyone could mute themselves, particularly talking to my mom here, but let me share my PowerPoint. All right, so hopefully everyone can see this now. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And I also want to say thank you to Annie Gibson for the invitation, for letting me talk to you all today. So sorry, let me get my screen set up before I start. All right. So as Annie mentioned, I'm a PhD student in linguistics here at Tulane, and primarily what I study as a linguist is I'm interested in issues of language and migration. I'm interested in how migrant communities, as they are displaced from their homelands, how they use their native languages in new places. I'm interested in the policies of the countries that they go to towards their native languages. And so specifically the last few years, I've really been focusing on the case of Haitian migrants in the Dominican Republic. And so I'm really excited to get to talk to you today, because I know that a lot of you that are here today are part of Study Abroad, and you're going to get to go to the DR this summer, and that you're taking a course on race and migration in the Dominican Republic. And so I really see this talk as kind of an introduction to these issues for you and for everyone else here. My major goals for this talk are that I want to give a background on general patterns of migration as they're seen in Haiti and the DR, and really kind of talk through a brief history of this migration. And with that, hopefully give some context to the diversity of Haitian communities that are found in the DR today. And then, because I'm a linguist, I want to talk about how language and linguistic differences really impact these issues, how issues like migration and documentation and belonging are all implicated so deeply in language. So I wanted to start with this image. This is an image from Vice News, and I think it's really striking. This is an image of a border crossing between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So on the left-hand side, you see the DR, you see a military truck and a few military officers. And on the right-hand side, you see Haitians who are waiting to be let in. And I think that this is a really striking image for a lot of reasons, but for one, and for the purposes of this talk, I think it does a really good job at showing really today what we see in this flow of migration, which is that this flow of migration is almost exclusively unidirectional from Haiti into the DR. There's not really a lot of migration on the island in the other direction. And so I'm going to come back to this image in a bit when we talk more about the border, but I really wanted to start with this. And before I get started, I also wanted to start by making a note that issues of migration and documentation are really complex, nuanced topics. And particularly in this context, it's a really politically charged topic. It's really emotionally charged for people. And it's a really complicated situation. And it's much more complex than I am going to be able to do justice to in the next 45 minutes. So I wanted to start by saying that. And I also wanted to start by asking everyone who's here to, keep in mind this adage that, two things can be true at the same time. And that for everything I say today, there are obviously exceptions. I'm going to be talking about a lot of general patterns that are seen and policies, but I wanted to start by prefacing this by saying that what I'm presenting today is not the case in every case. There are, of course, Haitians who aren't going to fall into these patterns. There are Dominicans who don't fall into these patterns. And so I just ask everyone to kind of keep that in mind throughout this talk. So I want to give a little bit of context about the island itself. So the island of Hispaniola is shared between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. It's one of the biggest islands in the Caribbean, and it's basically right smack in the middle of the Caribbean. So as I mentioned, migration on the island has really existed for hundreds of years since both nations were founded. But today, what we really see is that this migration pretty much only proceeds in one direction, which is from Haiti into the Dominican Republic. And without getting too in the weeds about it, I wanted to say that there are basically two major waves of migration that have happened throughout history from Haiti into the DR. The first wave really started in the early 20th century. In the early 1900s, the Dominican Republic really needed migrant laborers to work on Dominican sugarcane plantations. And they began offering seasonal visas to Haitian laborers. So what you saw was that there were massive amounts of primarily young Haitian men who started moving into the Dominican Republic seasonally, essentially during the sugarcane harvest time to work. And then in the off seasons, they would go back to Haiti. So this is really the first wave that we see. And then more recently, the second real wave started in 2010 after the Haitian earthquake. So I think probably everyone here is familiar with this, but in 2010, there was a devastating earthquake in Haiti. And in the aftermath, a lot of the political and economic instability in the country has caused a lot of Haitians to have to flee and to move into the neighboring Dominican Republic. So really, we have those two major waves. But what we see today is that most Haitian migration into the Dominican Republic in the current day happens en bas fil, which in Creole literally means under the wire, but almost all of this migration is undocumented. And so what this means is that it's almost impossible to get any sort of accurate estimate as to the number of Haitians that are in the Dominican Republic at any one time. And the estimates that you see are all over the place. So some people say there are hundreds of thousands. Some people put that number in the millions. A number that you see a lot from like the Dominican government is that there are 500,000 Haitian migrants in the Dominican Republic. But I think anyone who has spent significant time in the country would tell you that it is much more likely that that number is on the latter end and on the larger end. And particularly when you take into consideration not only first generation Haitian migrants, but also their descendants, we're really talking about millions of people. And so even if we consider this figure from 2015 of 2 million people, to put that into perspective, the current population of the Dominican Republic is about 10.8 million. So that would mean that Haitians and their descendants, right, are making up somewhere around 20 or 25% of the entire population of the Dominican Republic. So we are talking a huge population here. And to put this into perspective also within the Dominican economy, right, Haitians are employed in all sorts of sectors in the Dominican Republic, but a report that was released last year showed that more than 90% of agricultural workers in the DR were foreigners, and almost all of them were from Haiti. So this is just one industry, but this is an industry that's almost entirely dominated by Haitian workers. So when we're talking about this population, we are talking about a very substantial part of the entire Dominican population. And really what you see is that this migration is very diverse, both in who migrates and how they migrate and how long they stay. So what we know is that Haitians and their descendants live in all areas of the Dominican Republic. They live in every major city, they live in small towns, they live on the border region, and they live further inland. So it's not really the case that Haitians are concentrated in one particular area. They really live in all areas. And really, this migration is really diverse in terms of who is coming and why. You have people who come in and exit literally on a day-to-day basis. You have people who are coming in from Haiti maybe weekly or monthly, perhaps to work on construction projects or to work in agriculture during the harvest season, and then they go back to Haiti to take money. And then obviously you have permanent migrants who settle in the Dominican Republic. So what I want to do now is I want to kind of focus on two major areas where you see large Haitian communities. The first area is on the Dominican-Haitian border. So I'm going to come back to this map several times throughout this presentation because I think it's really helpful to get, a visual. But when you look at this map here, these four provinces that are highlighted here are the four Dominican border provinces. And each of these border provinces has a major city, a border city, where, it's kind of what you might picture in your head when you think of a border city that has, these big arches with gates where they check people's papers and let them in. But the border in general is generally considered a pretty transitory area. So most migrants who are coming into the border are there temporarily, and there's a lot of back and forth between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So a lot of people are coming into these, particularly the major border towns. They're coming in really on a day-to-day basis to work in these large binational border markets, which I'm going to say more on in a second. But they're also coming in for perhaps a few weeks at a time if there's a construction project that they've been hired on, or they're coming in for an agricultural harvest. And a lot of them come in and work and then go back to Haiti to take money, to visit family, and then they come back for the next job. There are obviously migrants who live in the border permanently, but in general, it's seen as either a more transitory space where people are coming and going from Haiti, or where they're living while they wait kind of to go further inland into the Dominican Republic. And so really, particularly in the southern border region here, you can see how this back and forth would be, like why this might be so common. So Port-au-Prince, the capital of Haiti, which is here, is really only about 45 minutes or an hour from this major border crossing. So it's really, it's not like it's super far. And so I wanted to come back to this picture of that I showed at the beginning from Vice News of this border crossing. So this is the border gate of Elias Pina, which is right here in the middle of the border. And what you'll notice is that most of these Haitians who are waiting to come into the Dominican Republic, right, they're carrying these sacks. And so these are called pacas. And what you will find, and I know that those of you who are like going to study abroad, that you're going to get to visit a border market which is really exciting. And so really what has happened in this case is that Haiti continues to receive tons of international donations of clothes and other items, but it's really much more than Haitians themselves need. And so what has happened is there is this whole informal economy where Haitians are taking surplus into the Dominican Republic to sell it. Sorry, I'm going to check the I'm just checking the chat from Annie. Yeah, so you will be in the border crossing of Dajabon, which is the largest border market in the country. But really what you see is that these Haitian migrants come into the Dominican Republic and sell these goods. And so these binational border markets have really become an extremely important part of the economies of both countries. It's a way for Haitians to make money, and it's also a major way for Dominicans, particularly those who live near the border, to buy goods and necessities. And so I have a few more pictures that I wanted to show of these markets. So these are some pictures that I took a few years ago, but this is the binational market in Jimani, which is the border crossing that's closest to Port-au-Prince. And so you'll see really that the goods that are being bought and sold here, right? Like this is a packet of noodles. You have like bleach and cooking oils and snacks. So it's clothes, but it is also daily necessities that are being sold in these markets. And so all along the border, you have these markets, you have these kind of informal agreements between border agents and Haitians where there's no special permits that they get to come in and sell. It's just sort of this agreement that they're going to come in and work in the market and go back to Haiti. But on the actual border, really, there's no physical wall on most of the border. There is currently a border wall that is being constructed, but in most places, there's not actually a physical wall. And so the Dominican Office of Migration identified there's almost 100 different kind of unofficial border crossings all along this border. But this is a picture here from Jimani. And these are Haitian tap-taps, which have come from Haiti into this border market. So you see like the plantains, you see a clothing vendor. But I also wanted to include this picture because while there's no physical wall most places, I think by looking at this terrain, you kind of get a picture of what most of the border is like. And you can see it's really mountainous, it's really deserty, it's really unfriendly. So while there's no physical wall, it is very dangerous terrain for migrants to cross. And so this is basically what you see on the border, right? It's this day-to-day comings and goings. It's markets where Haitians and Dominicans are interacting. But I wanted then to turn from the border to the other major place where there are substantial Haitian communities in the DR. And this is primarily where I do most of my research, but these are the bâtés. So if you've never heard this word before, I also know that the Tulane students this summer are going to be visiting one or maybe even two bâtés. So I want to give you a little historical context to what these communities are. So bâtés are sometimes called sugarcane communities. This is a pretty old map that I found. This one's from 1984, but bâtés are communities that historically have been owned by the Dominican sugarcane industry. So sugarcane historically, but also now is one of the major exports of the Dominican Republic. And so this map is really just showing kind of like expansion of the Dominican sugarcane industry over time. But I included it because you can really see that sugar is being harvested all over the Dominican Republic. And so bâtés are all over the Dominican Republic. So these communities are really fascinating, unique places. So bâtés are commonly considered Haitian communities within the Dominican Republic. Sometimes they're called like states within a state. And so essentially how these formed were that, starting in the early 20th century, as I mentioned, the Dominican government and really the Dominican sugar industry had a great need for labor during the harvest season. And so the Dominican government started granting temporary visas to Haitian workers to come over, work during the harvest season, and then go back to Haiti. So these workers needed a place to live while they were there working. So the sugarcane companies started building bateys, which were supposed to be temporary housing communities, essentially right next to the sugarcane fields. So you can see, this is a picture from a few years ago, but you can see the sugarcane field right beside it. And so these communities were really, they were bare bones, right? Like most of the time, these living quarters had no running water, no electricity. And the expectation was that in the off season, these workers would go back to Haiti. What started happening was that over time, less and less of these workers were returning to Haiti. They were staying in the bateys year round. They were bringing family members over from Haiti to live with them. And over time, these became permanent settlements within the Dominican Republic. So, you know, because they're in all areas of the Dominican Republic, what you see is that now there are these pockets of Haitian communities all throughout the country. And these are really today multi-generational communities. Because they're places where mostly Haitians live, they're often thought of as sort of Creole speaking language islands that everyone there speaks Creole. But one thing that I think is really interesting that I wanted to note about these bateys, this is a map that it's really hard to find figures on bateys or maps about bateys. This is one that I found, I think, in a public health paper. And so all these white dots are bateys, but this is by no means a comprehensive map. It's thought that there are anywhere between like 300 and 400 bateys in the DR today. So this is not all of them, but it's really just to show kind of the spread throughout the country. So one thing that's really interesting is sort of how these have evolved over time. So these are two pictures that I found in the Dominican Archive a few years ago. So this is Bate Montellano at the beginning of the 20th century. And then down below, this is Bate Ginebra. And what you see is that this housing, right, in this case, it's almost completely surrounded by the sugarcane fields. And so over time, what has happened in these communities is that as more and more people have moved in from Haiti, and as families have grown, there's really no place for a lot of these communities to expand outwards, because in a lot of cases, they're quite literally surrounded by sugarcane. So what happens is that over time, these communities get more and more dense. And so this is a picture that I took of a batey close to Santo Domingo a few years ago, but you can really see how dense these communities get, right? Houses get built on top of each other. And it really creates this really tight-knit, close-knit community, right? So I know that was a lot of information, but sort of to sum this up, the major points to take away from that are that, you know, Haitians live in all areas of the Dominican National Territory and in large numbers. The two main places where you find really large Haitian communities are on the border, which, as I mentioned, is sort of seen as this transitory space, and then in the bateys, which are multi-generational permanent settlements of Haitians and their descendants in the Dominican Republic. So a lot of times what you find in bateys are third and fourth generation Dominicans of Haitian descent who really descended from these original sugarcane workers. So now that we sort of have this idea about where Haitians live and how they got there, I do want to turn really to the attitudes about Haitian migration in the country and really how this community is received in the Dominican Republic. And so I want to say that the Dominican Republic as a country has a really long and well-documented history of human rights abuses against Haitian migrant communities, of persecution of Haitian migrant communities. So this is a sign that says, we don't want Haitians, you've got 45 days to get out. And this is well documented. It is well reported on. There's been a lot of research on this. And it's generally referred to, right, as anti-Haitianism, this sentiment, right? Anti-Haitianismo. And so really, I think one of the most important things to consider in this context, and something that you really can't talk about migration in the Dominican Republic without talking about, is the issue of statelessness. So the Dominican Republic currently has the largest population of stateless people in the Americas, and one of the largest populations of stateless people in the world. And so stateless meaning that no country claims them as a citizen. And so up until 2013, the Dominican Republic had birthright citizenship, meaning if you were born on Dominican soil, no matter whether or not your parents were documented or not, you were given Dominican citizenship upon birth. This changed in 2013. What happened was there was a court ruling in 2013 that revoked birthright citizenship. So it established that even if you're born in the Dominican Republic on Dominican soil, unless your parents were Dominicans or legal residents, you were not granted citizenship upon birth. And so this obviously might seem like a sticky situation, and you might expect that this ruling would mean that any child born after 2013 would, to undocumented parents, would not be considered a citizen. But in reality, what happened was that this ruling was applied retroactively to all people born in the Dominican Republic after 1929. So I want to try to put how monumental and how devastating that was, like, into perspective. So if you think about the fact that, you know, let's say in the 1930s, a Haitian laborer came into the Dominican Republic legally under a work visa to work in sugarcane harvest. Tens of thousands of Haitians did. If this person then stayed in the Dominican Republic, you know, after their visa expired, they then became undocumented, even though they had originally entered legally. So this person, let's say, stays in the Dominican Republic in Abate, they get married, they have children, their children have children, their children have children, and all of them that are born there have Dominican citizenship. So then in 2013, literally overnight, that entire family would have their citizenship revoked. So if you're a child that was born in the Dominican Republic, your parents were born in the Dominican Republic, your grandparents were born in the Dominican Republic, maybe none of you have ever stepped foot in Haiti. Overnight, these entire families had their citizenship revoked. So this deprived tens of thousands of people of Haitian descent their nationality, and it really created this enormous stateless population, which was a huge human rights crisis. I think, you know, obviously, if you don't have citizenship, you don't have a passport, you don't have a legal ID. But when you really think about this, the staggering amount of human rights violations that came as a result of this court case were that if you do not have citizenship in the Dominican Republic, you can't go to public school after the 8th grade. You can't attend university. Even if you had finished school before this ruling, you can't then attend a public university with no citizenship. You can't get legal employment. You can't access health insurance. You can't own property. You can't get a driver's license. You can't travel internationally. And as of last year, if you are undocumented in the Dominican Republic, you cannot seek medical treatment in Dominican hospitals. And so while all of these are egregious human rights abuses, I really want to focus for a second on this last one, because it's very recent and it's something that particularly those of you who are going this summer, it will likely come up. So In late 2021, Dominican President Abinader and his government passed a policy that said that Dominican hospitals no longer had the responsibility to treat undocumented migrants, except in cases of emergency. But this policy didn't lay out like what constituted an emergency, who was, whose decision it was to decide what is an emergency. And this is a really good example of migration policy being used specifically to target Haitians. There are other migrants in the Dominican Republic. There are, migrants from the United States. There is recently, a large population of Venezuelan migrants, some of which are undocumented. But in this context, this is a good example of how a lot of times when migration is talked about in the Dominican Republic, it specifically refers to Haitian migration. So when this policy was passed, it really was a response to this larger societal concern that Haitian migrants in the Dominican Republic are taking advantage of Dominican state resources, that they're a burden on the state. And so the justification that the president gave when he introduced this policy was that the Dominican Republic, quote, can no longer keep carrying the burdens of Haiti's problems. And so I also included this screenshot from Listín Diario, which is one of the biggest newspapers in the Dominican Republic. And they basically shared this policy and kind of the 4 different parts of it. And so this is a screenshot of this last part of this policy. And it says, this policy, it says, it will limit only in cases of emergency access to public hospitals in all of the country to illegal immigrants, #Haiti. So this was clearly a response directly to Haitian migrants, right? And this has created a whole host of problems. First of all, that, people who really are in perilous situations can't access hospitals. It also has meant that pregnant Haitian women have been turned away from hospitals. There are a lot of videos in the last few months that have gone viral of Haitian women literally giving birth on the sidewalk outside of a hospital after they've been turned away. So this policy has had devastating consequences on undocumented migrants in the Dominican Republic. And it's really part of, within the last few years, what has been a really violent turn from the Dominican government towards Haitian migrants. So there have always been, migration raids and deportations from the Dominican state, and deportations of Haitians back to Haiti. But really in the last few years, these have really ramped up. And so I want to spend a second kind of talking about this. So in 2021, the Dominican Republic got a new Minister of Migration, Enrique Garcia. And really under his control, these migrations have really ramped up. So this is a publication that came out from the government migration office that said that, just in between October 10th and 16th of last year, that they deported almost 5,000 illegal foreigners, it says. Here's another one from late 2021 that says that in the year of 2021, they deported more than 31,000 Haitians. Here's one from late 2022 that says the headline is Director of Migration assures that illegals will be thrown out of the country. And in this article, he outlines and he basically affirms that the Ministry of Migration was on track to deport 1,000 Haitians per day during this time period. And you see the picture of literally trucks driving around and rounding up undocumented Haitian migrants. And one part of all this that I wanted to touch on was that for a long time, even while these deportations were happening, it was understood that pregnant Haitian women were kind of exempt from this because of their health, because of the situation in Haiti. But that has also changed in the last few months. And so these are 2 quotes from one of these articles from Listín Diario, and these are my translations below. But I wanted to read these In recent months and after the designation of the new director of migration, Enrique Garcia, deportations of illegal Haitians to their country have increased considerably, including those of pregnant Haitian women who represent an economic burden on the Dominican state. And this one goes on to say that of the 31,000 people who were deported that year, 3,000 of them were pregnant women of different ages. And so this is really a turn that we've seen really in the last year with regards to the deportation policy. But it's not just undocumented Haitians who are subject to this. This also, in late 2021, the Dominican government suspended student visas for Haitian students. So even Haitians who were in the country legally found themselves in this really precarious situation. The excerpt from this reads here that the Dominican government last night decided to indefinitely pause the program of visas for Haitian students in the country. So it's specifically for Haitian students. And then, you know, the caption under this picture says that, you know, Haitians fill up the Dominican consul in Cape Haitian looking for visas. And so it's not just undocumented Haitians that are the subject to this uncertainty and this persecution. It is student Haitians who are there legally on visas as well. And so I know that that is all very heavy, that is all very dense. It doesn't paint a good picture. I want to sort of turn now. Sorry, I'm getting a call. I want to turn now. Sorry. I think it's my nephew's trying to call me. But I want to turn now into how language plays into all of this. You know, you have this whole community of migrants who are being so persecuted. So what does language have to do with any of this? How are these migrants maintaining their language? How does the Dominican government responded with regards to language? And so we're coming back to this map. I wanted to briefly just kind of paint the landscape of the Dominican, or of Hispaniola, I'm sorry, with regards to language, so that we know exactly what we're talking about. But Hispaniola is really rare in the world. It is one of only a handful of islands in the entire world where there are two nations that speak two different languages on the same island. And so these languages are Haitian Creole and Spanish. So in Haiti, I think that there's the common misconception that Haiti is a French-speaking country. And really, that's not the case. Linguists have demonstrated that really only somewhere like something like 5% of the Haitian population actually speaks French. And the people who speak it don't speak it as a first language. It's a second language for those who do speak it. But the mother tongue of everyone in Haiti is Haitian Creole. And so in the Dominican Republic, the official language is Spanish. And I think that a lot of times the Dominican Republic is, you know, represented as a monolingual Spanish-speaking country. But anyone who's spent considerable time in the country will tell you that Creole, I mean, just because of the sheer number of Haitians in the country, Creole is really the unofficial language of the country. If you walk down any street in the Dominican Republic, you hear Creole being spoken. People grow up in the Dominican Republic speaking Creole as a first language. And so that's sort of the picture that I want to paint, right? You have all these migrants in the Dominican Republic, but they don't leave their language behind. They continue speaking Creole, even in the DR. And so Creole is not a recognized language in the Dominican Republic in any way, shape, or form. And really what linguists know is that Dominicans themselves, this is a quote from Juan Valdez, who has done a lot of work on this. They've been accustomed to either purposefully ignore the presence of Creole in Dominican society or to think of it as an invading language. And really, a lot of the Dominican state has been set up in such a way to promote and advance Spanish, really at the expense of Creole. So Spanish only education. But what we also know is that, and what I found in my own research is that really, despite the attitudes and really the widespread prejudice against Haitians and their language in the Dominican Republic, Creole continues to be passed intergenerationally all over the country. These migrant communities, whether it's in bateys or on the border or in cities, they don't really see this big shift to Spanish and this abandonment of Creole. Families continue speaking Creole in the home. A lot of children grow up in the home speaking Creole as a first language. And a lot of them grow up and are successful bilinguals, right? There's a lot of bilingualism in the country. What we also know is that this bilingualism is almost exclusively on the part of Haitians, right? Haitians speak both Creole and Spanish, but it's very rare that Dominicans learn Creole. And really part of this is because if you're a Dominican who wants to learn Creole, there's almost nowhere to do that. There's no schools to teach you. They don't teach it in public schools. There aren't really materials for you to use. So unless you have a friend who can teach you, there's not really a way to learn it. But also legally, with language in, the Dominican legal system, there are no legal requirements in the Dominican Republic to really offer Creole services to anyone. The only exception is if someone is in Dominican custody, meaning they've already been arrested and they're either in jail or they're arrested and they're being deported, the Dominican government is legally supposed to offer an interpreter or translator. But often in those cases, it's too late. The person is already in custody. But in situations like in hospitals, in schools, in courthouses, in jails, there is no legal responsibility for the government to provide any sort of Creole language services. And so really what you see in this case is that language, or really the exclusion of the Creole language from Dominican society, is often used by the government as a tool to really perpetuate these systems of exclusion of Haitian migrants. And it also creates a system where you have really vulnerable migrant populations who aren't able to legally advocate for themselves. How do you stick up for yourself if there's no services in your language? If you go to the hospital and you're trying to express to someone that you're experiencing an emergency, but there's no one there to interpret for you, it becomes a very dangerous situation. But I want to turn now to like a lighter note. I know that is very heavy and it's very dense and it paints a very bleak picture. And so you might be wondering, like, how are people responding to this? What's happening on the ground? And really, there is a lot of activism on the ground level with regards to statelessness, but also with regards to the Haitian Dominican population as a whole. So there are protests, there is education going on, there are talks. So, right, these are from a protest last year. These signs say Haitian Lives Matter. There are lots of on-the-ground activists doing amazing work. So pictured on the right here, this is Ana Belique, who's one of the foremost Haitian Dominican activists in the Dominican Republic today. They're speaking, right? This sign behind them says that, this is a critical training space for Dominicans of Haitian descent. So there's a lot of training and legal workshops that are going on. There are a lot of sources that you can follow if you're interested in this, right? Encultured Company and Reconocido are amazing Instagram pages that share news and updates. So there are a lot of places that you can turn to for news. There are also a lot of movements to start including Creole in Dominican public schools. So this center has made several public calls for the Dominican public school system to start offering Creole language classes, because right now Dominican public schools offer French and they offer English, but they don't offer any Creole, even though they have so many students whose first language is Creole. So there are all these calls. As of last year, there's, to my knowledge, the first ever course in Haitian Creole for Spanish speakers. Before this, all the textbooks really that you could find for Haitian Creole were geared towards English speakers. So there are now courses for Spanish speakers. If you're a Dominican who wants to learn, you can access that now. And so I wanted to end on a more positive note, really, of how these relations kind of I think should be viewed going forward. And so I wanted to kind of give this reflection from Samuel Martinez, who's an anthropologist. And this is a work of his from 2003, but he has this work called Not a Cockfight. And essentially in this article, what he's calling for is a new way to look at Haitian-Dominican relations. That, you know, he argues that for a long time, the way that scholars have approached this, or tourists, is that people tend to study these countries as in opposition to one another, and they focus on the differences between the countries, the fighting between the countries, but they haven't spent as much time focusing on the significant overlap and cultural exchange between the countries, which is significant. And so he writes in this, right, that the people of both nations are bound together by cultural exchanges, and that any discussion of the Haitian-Dominican relationship should no longer fail to call attention to the significant cultural overlap and the history of continuous exchange across the island. And so really, you see this within academia, but within my own work, it's something that I've been reflecting on, and it's really that there is this real need to engage with the island as a whole, and really with the transnational identity of the island. It is really hard to study one place as in, you know, totally separate from the other, because they are so bound together. There has been so much migration, there is so much overlap, and their histories and economies are so deeply intertwined that I think it does a disservice to both Haitians and Dominicans, and to ourselves as scholars, to ignore those overlaps. And so this is sort of also why I'm encouraged by those of you who are going to the DR this summer. I think it's amazing that you're going and you're going to be able to engage with the island in this way and really see on the ground what this looks like. And so I wanted to actually end with like some visual art. And so one of my favorite Dominican visual artists, Telma Vanai, who I think is actually here today. I can't see the participants anymore, but I think she's actually here today. This is her rendering of, right, this theory by Samuel Martinez of Not a Cockfight. And what I love about Telma's work is that she engages with the island as a whole, and she presents a lot of this cultural overlap. Even though she's Dominican, she always represents the Haitian part in her art, right, about the DR. And so I wanted to end, I think this picture is beautiful, and I have a few other examples that I want to show. But I really wanted to end by saying that, you know, I said at the beginning of this talk that it's true that, you know, two things can be true at the same time. And while certainly I'm sure that this painted a very bleak picture of the situation, I don't want anyone to leave this by thinking that that is the only thing that is happening in the Dominican Republic, is this persecution of Haitian migrants. I think certainly on a national policy level, that is what we see. But I think when you go to the DR and you're really in a lot of these communities, you see that Haitians and Dominicans in many cases have very deep personal relationships, that they care for one another, that a lot of these families are bound deeply, that there are a lot of Dominicans who don't prescribe to the views of their government. And so really that's the beauty when you get to go, is that you're going to get to see what this looks like on the ground, and it adds nuance to, you know, this story. So a lot of her work, and I wanted to show a few more pieces, really engages with the island as a whole and on the similar histories across the island. You can find more at her Instagram. I feel like such a fangirl since she's here today, but you can find more. But This is a reflection that I saw on her Instagram a few years ago and that I saved, and that I come back to in my own work and my own thinking about the island. And I think it's a really beautiful reflection of this relationship. And so I've translated it, and this is my own translation that I'm going to read. So I hope that I did it justice, but I really wanted to end on this note. So these are her words. This is her piece. Someone asked me the other day why I always show the Dominican Republic with the Haitian part. I always speak and write about the island because for me, they're the left and right lungs. They're both necessary to fully live. One side needs the other, and in the center, I imagine an enormous heart. If I return to the island in my thoughts, I see Haitians all over like Dominicans. I see Haitians building buildings, selling fruits, working in families' houses, and taking care of their homes. I think about the island, and Haiti isn't foreign to me. There are a lot of Dominicans that cross into Haiti to open beauty salons and other businesses. There are so many producers that benefit from Haitian consumption. There are so many business people who benefit from Haitian labor. No, Haiti isn't a problem, and no, the Dominican Republic wouldn't be better off without Haiti at its side. So I wanted to end with this, and I have some sources, but I wanted to say thank you all for coming so much. I've included my email here. I don't know how I'm doing on time. I'm happy to answer some questions now, but also if you have any questions, particularly those of you who are going this summer, that you'd like to ask, I really encourage you to reach out. If you'd like my slides or any sources, I'm happy to share, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Kendall. We do have about 5 minutes for questions, and I just want to thank you for showing the complexity and joy and pain in this experience. In an hour, it's really hard to do justice to all the themes that you brought up, and that was great. And Thelma, I'm also so grateful to have you and your art here. Thank you so much. So feel free to unmute yourself for questions or type in the chat. I see we do have one in the chat, which we can go ahead and answer, which Emma asked, does this language education happen in school or is it private companies?
Well, to answer the question, it doesn't really happen at all. It definitely doesn't happen in public schools. Public schools have never offered Creole in the DR, and it doesn't really seem like any of the current movements have any traction. So it doesn't really seem like it's going to happen. But really in private companies, there's a lot of interest in learning English in the DR or even French, but there aren't really private companies that you can go to either to learn Creole. So this, the textbooks that I shared is actually this young, it's kind of a passion project of this young Haitian college student that I met last summer. So he is born and raised in Haiti and lives in the DR, and he developed these textbooks himself, basically because he saw a gap in the market and understood that, you know, there were no resources for Spanish speakers who wanted to learn Creole. But to answer that question, basically, it doesn't happen really in the private sphere or the public sphere. And it's something that, you know, I've talked to people about. For example, if you're a company in the DR and you wanted to provide a Creole language training for your employees, it's something that I've asked around about, of essentially where would you go and who would you ask? And there's really no one. So medical schools don't offer Creole classes for med students, even though most of them end up going and doing rotations in bâtés and in primarily Haitian communities. Most of them go in with no Creole language experience because it's just simply not taught. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
I have a question. Oh, I'll defer to the chat.
Is there any opposition on Haiti's side that pushes back against the rights violations on immigrants in the DR? Yes, there definitely is. And not just rights violations in the DR, but also in the US and in other places. But yeah, there definitely are. There are activists on both sides. But I think it's also the thing of, you know, if you're in Haiti, there's only so much you can do on a governmental side or as an activist about what's going on in a different country. John, do you have a question?
Yeah. You talked about how there's a disparity between the sentiments of the Dominican public and the sentiments of the government and its policies. And I was just wondering if there were specific agents or powers or forces resisting the dignity of Haitians and Haitian Creole, if there are specific interests that are acting against, or if it's just the kind of entrenched sentiment born from a system.
So do you mean, are there entities within the Dominican Republic? Like
I'd imagine that at, the early 20th century, that it would have been sugarcane companies that would have had a vested interest in continually subjugating and dehumanizing Haitians as Baptistes distance themselves from companies that formed them. If that power structure was still in play, or if it's just, good old xenophobia.
It's both. So Dominican sugar companies still have a vested interest in this because Haitian labor is still cheap migrant labor for them. But it's also a governmental interest because of this larger concern amongst levels of Dominican society, but also in the government, that Haitian migrants come into the DR to exploit Dominican resources, that they abuse public services and hospitals and schools, and that they're a burden on the state. So in this way, right, it is a vested interest of them because they see it as they directly said in a lot of these rulings and these new policies, that they see these migrants as a burden on the state and that it's their economic advantage to get them out of the country. Yeah, Carolina.
Hi, Kendall, I want to thank you so much for that kind of history of Haitian migration in the Dominican Republic. And I have you and I saw Loria Garcia Peña speak at Xavier. In my Latinx class, we talk about kind of conceptions of Blackness in the Dominican Republic, and we read her pieces on dismantling anti-Blackness in the Dominican American community in the United States. So, this whole system, right, of this, like, condemning them as migrants, as you just said, right? Like, there's a history of condemning them for all sorts of reasons, right? And now it's migration. So now they have this opportunity to do that. I wonder if at all, and I mentioned Loria Garcia Peña, thinking about her idea of Blackness and recognizing Blackness and recognizing intersectionality. And I'm wondering if, and I know you don't necessarily work on race, but the idea of Dominicans learning or exploring their Blackness through Haitian Blackness, right? Like what would that look like? Is that something that happens? Is that something that could happen? Maybe I'm thinking really in the future, and I don't know. I'm just thinking about like what Haitians what Dominicans could learn about race and race identity through Haitians, or is that part of the problem? Is that something that doesn't want to happen? I don't know what you think. And this might have not happened or has not come up, but it just occurred to me
Yeah, it definitely comes up, and race is something that underlies absolutely all of this in terms of language and migration. I think for the purposes of this talk, it's like I just didn't have time to touch on it, but what you see, so I can't speak for the future. I will say that a lot of this did start coming up really in the international context of the Black Lives Matter movement, that a lot of these conversations were happening in Haiti and in the DR. But what I will say is that, particularly with regards to language, so much of this opposition to Haitians and to Creole is very racialized. And in my own research, it's something that I found that when people are asked about Creole or asked about Haitians, there's this idea, particularly for descendants of Haitians in the country, that if you are Black, if your hair looks a certain way, if your skin looks a certain way, oh, you must therefore speak Creole. It is the idea of this language use is very much linked to race. And so what you find is that all over the country, people who are maybe third or fourth generation Haitian, they're born and raised in the Dominican Republic, if they are seen as Blacker than Dominicans, what they've said is that they'll say, well, people will come up and say, well, you're so Black or your hair looks this way, so you must speak Creole. And it is very much this idea that Haitians are Blacker than Dominicans. So a lot of what you see with regards to migration and this xenophobia, but also with regards to language, directly relates back to race. So I don't have an answer for your question in terms of like how this is going to look moving forward, but it definitely underlies all of this. And yeah, as Annie said, I know that that is a big part of this summer program. So for those of you who are going this summer, you will see how much this really is a current that runs under all of this.
And as if you needed another current, right? Like
Yeah.
there's already a lot going on, and race kind of undergirding all of that, right?
Yeah.
That whole relationship. Mm-hmm.
Kendall, I want to thank you so much. This was such a great introduction and to your research, to what is going on the ground in the Dominican Republic, that I think is going to be so important for students as they're figuring out where they fit in this. So, and thank you all for joining. And please, in the chat, I put Kendall's email. Please do reach out. Those of you joining from afar, thank you for being here. And Thelma, especially, thank you for your art. I can't wait to follow you on Instagram.
Thank you.
Great follow. Yeah, thank you all for coming. I know. Yeah, bye.